Amara, your little projects are quite cute, but let's be honest, a girl like you will never shine in the Moreau Schiaparetier. Colette Moreau's voice sliced through the air like a shard of ice amidst the opulent backdrop of the Arctic Heritage Gala. Gowns stitched with pearls, string quartets echoing across glass, and intricately carved ice masks. But nothing colder than their eyes on her. Amara Nyong stood still in the crowd, her silver gown inspired by the aurora looking misplaced in a world woven from bloodlines and wealth. Then another voice, this time from her sister-in-law, Celeste. Trying to be the star, Amara? You look more like a smudge, a dark spot in the family legacy. Laughter cracked like shattered stone. But what they didn't know, at that moment a seaplane bearing the Solar Heart insignia was descending onto the lake behind the estate. And that door, was about to open. The Moreau estate sat on a snow-covered slope overlooking a half-frozen Lake St. Louis. Black oak walls, limestone columns as cold as pedigree. Inside, a world where every object bore legacy, except her. Amara Nyong, 34 of Kenyan descent, was the only person in that hall who had ever slept on a bed made from shipping crates. From a Kisumu orphanage to McGill University, then international marketing. No one here knew that. No one cared. Her dress, hand-woven by an Inuk artisan, reflected the aurora against the snow. But to them it was just a cute idea. Julian, her husband, and the youngest Moreau son gently squeezed her hand as they passed through the archway. "We just need to get through tonight," he whispered. She didn't answer, because to her tonight wasn't about getting through. It was about remembering and beginning. The ballroom shimmered in a cold blue hue. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen planets. Classical music echoed. No one truly listened. Amara walked in like a mistuned note. Her hand-woven silver gown reflected the light, but to them it was a beat-off. Colette raised a glass, her voice airy as frost. Indigenous dress? How charming. Still chasing those solar projects? Where was it? Kenya? Ghana? A ripple of polite laughter, sharp enough to sting. Celeste leaned toward a guest and whispered, "She doesn't need light. She's the darkness." Amara pressed her lips. In the silence she realized this place had no shortage of light, only a blindness to what truly mattered. Glasses clinked in smug rhythm. Colette raised hers higher. "To the Moreau legacy. 100 years of leadership and enlightenment." Applause followed. Amara stayed silent. Celeste approached, her lips curled like a blade. "Still fundraising for those light projects, Amara? Got a PowerPoint for us tonight? Or just dreams?" She chuckled, turning to her friends. "Maybe you'd be better off with the kids. They're building a puzzle of Africa. Suits you better." Laughter burst like breaking ice. Amara looked around, faces hidden behind titles, fortunes, accolades. She set her glass down. And for the first time that night she spoke. Legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. No one laughed anymore. Dun! Amara stepped forward. Light from the marble floor lit her face, clear, unbowed. "Legacy doesn't live in your name, your shares, or walls your ancestors built." She paused. Steady voice. "It lives in the hands of a rural girl who turns on a light for the first time to read, in a mother who no longer burns wood to boil water, in every solar panel you mock as a toy." A strange hush blanketed the room. Celeste tightened her lips. Colette blinked once too long. Julian looked at her, but didn't interrupt. Amara took a slow, steady breath and smiled. "Thank you for putting me in a room full of lights, so I could finally see who's truly in the dark." Amara turned, walking calmly through the ballroom. Her heels echoed on marble like a countdown, not of retreat, but a deliberate withdrawal. Julian followed quietly, his eyes no longer avoiding. His hand brushed her back, not to guide her, but to show he was there. Outside, snow had begun to fall. She wrapped her scarf. Her breath misted in Montreal's cold air. They walked past the stone pillars, beneath the arch engraved, "The Moreau Legacy, a Century of Light." Amara looked up and smiled. "Lit by candles, walled by stone." Julian asked softly, "Home?" She nodded. "No, we begin from here." A faint glow shimmered at the lake's edge. A seaplane quietly coasted to the dock. The seaplane came to rest beside an old wooden pier. Red marker lights blinked like a heartbeat in the morning fog. The pilot stepped out and opened the cabin door with a familiar nod. Amara climbed the metal stairs, her silver gown fluttering in the wind. Julian followed silently. His silence now wasn't withdrawal, but reverence. Inside, the cabin was small but warm. On the table lay a map of northern Manitoba, red dots marking the first sites for Cree solar water filtration units. Amara sat down, removed her leather gloves, and opened her tablet. An email popped up. Solar Heart, approved for Indigenous Women's Fund, Phase 2. She smiled. The wind roared outside, but inside the journey had stabilized. Ahead lay a destination they chose themselves. The engine's hum rumbled beneath her feet. Snowy forests receded through the round window. Amara leaned her head against the glass, letting memory rise. She recalled Kizumu, power outages, smoky kerosene lamps, her grandmother wrapped in thick cloth, voice hoarse but steady, telling stories of women hauling water from dawn till dusk. "We are not poor," her grandmother once said. "We only lack light." Light, not just to see, but to see the way. Amara looked at her hands, the same hands that packed the first solar lamps, pitched to 3 laughing investors, signed the first contract just to pay her team. Julian touched her shoulder, gentle, warm. She turned to him, smiling softly. Grandma was right. Light is a basic right. Julian opened his notebook, flipping to a sketch of a floating solar station on a frozen lake. The lines were soft, precise, drawn by someone once trained in design but forced into the family's finance world. "You still sketch?" Amara asked, her eyes pausing at the note, for places forgotten by maps. Julian nodded, smiling gently. "Never stopped, just hit it." She pointed at the design. "Solar Heart needs someone like you, not just with a pen, but with numbers." Julian tilted his head. "Full-time CFO, starting pay, 1 hug and hand-brewed coffee?" "No vacation, no risky investments, no business cards," Amara added. He extended his hand. "But shared vision." She took it. His hand was cold, but firm. From the rear cabin, a chime. "Project Nunavut, funding approved." They looked at each other. No more words needed. They knew the real journey had just begun. The seaplane descended. Below, the lakeside town appeared, where freezing winds couldn't hide fragile roofs and windows without light. Nunavut wasn't a place most chose. But to Amara, it was where it all truly began. On a frosty landing strip, 3 Inuit women stood waiting. Each held a child. In their hands, small flashlights bearing the Solar Heart logo, the first prototypes Amara had ever packed by hand. She stepped down, boots crunching into snow. Her breath rose in clouds. One little girl ran up and placed a drawing in her hand, a house with yellow light glowing from the roof. Amara knelt, asking gently, "Is this your home?" The girl shook her head. "It's home for all of us." Behind her, Julian nodded. The camera was ready. But Amara didn't look at the lens. She was looking into the real light. Inside a tin-roofed community house, soft white light from solar panels spread evenly across the room. No stage, no flowers, no lengthy speeches, just 3 wooden tables, a few maps, and women discussing in 3 languages. Amara sat among them, not lecturing, not directing. She listened. One woman pointed at a schematic of the solar water filtration system and nodded. Another wrote on the whiteboard, "Self-maintained, self-operated, not dependent." Amara smiled. This was no longer her project. It was theirs. Julian stood outside the window, sunlight reflecting off his glasses. He snapped a photo, not of a founder, but of hands touching the future. Night fell, but this time the light remained, and now it belonged to them. Dusk had set in. As Amara stepped out of the community center, her phone buzzed. An email from Colette Moreau. "We cordially invite Amara and Julian to attend the Moreau Centennial Gala. Press will be present." The final line read, "Your presence is necessary for the family image." Amara stood still. The wind slipped through her collar, but it wasn't as cold as the tone of the message. Julian approached. "My mother?" She nodded. "Inviting me back to the place they once cast me out." He waited. Amara looked into the distance. The lights from the first solar station on the hillside had just flicked on. She said softly, "This time I'm not going to be seen. I'm going so they have to look." In a small lakeside cabin, Amara spread out the event map. Moreau Centennial Gala. Live broadcast. International guest list. She wasn't avoiding it anymore. This time she led. Julian, holding a laptop, looked at her. "Want me to contact the press?" Amara nodded. "But not for a flattering story. I want them to witness the truth." On the screen, Solar Heart's latest footage. Cree children studying under new lights. Inuit women installing solar panels. A map showing impact across the Arctic and East Africa. She sent the link to 3 news outlets. Broadcast it during the gala, at the exact same time. Julian looked at her. "What are you planning to do?" Amara smiled, her eyes unwavering. "No need to tear down their legacy. Just place it next to something that actually matters." The sun hadn't fully arisen. Wind swept cold across the frozen lake. Amara wore an emerald green suit, hair tied high, a briefcase in hand embossed with the Solar Heart logo. No evening gown, no frills. Julian stood by the seaplane, opening the cabin door. You sure? More certain than anything I've ever chosen. She climbed the steps, not once looking back. Inside, the livestream kit was already set. On the screen, live connection, Nunavut communities, 6:20 p.m. EST. The engine roared. Ice cracked beneath the hull. The seaplane surged forward, leaving behind snow-covered forests, heading for Montreal. This time, Amara wasn't going to be acknowledged. She was going so no one could pretend not to see. Montreal appeared beneath the final winter mist, a city of wealth and elegance, where legacy was displayed like antique glassware. The plane landed on the private strip behind the Moreau estate. No applause, no host waiting, just wind and the watchful eyes of security behind binoculars. Amara stepped out first. Her tailored suit stood out boldly against gray snow, no jewels needed. Julian followed, carrying the broadcast box marked with Solar Heart, an emblem of a new era. Golden light spilled from the estate's arched windows. Inside was a world long accustomed to power, but unprepared for the consequences of denial. Amara stopped before the black iron gates. We don't have to walk in loud, Julian said. She nodded. We are the sound they've never dared to hear. The Moreau gates creaked open like a centuries-old ritual. Inside, the lawn was carpeted in white. Stone statues of ancestors loomed like silent judges. Amara walked in, her snow-gripping heels leaving tracks that could not be erased. To the left, a string quartet played Ravel. To the right, guests sipped wine, speaking in nasal tones wrapped in legacy. But everything paused when they saw her. No gown, no jewels, no forced smile, only a steady gaze and a clear greeting. Happy 100 years. I didn't come to celebrate. No one answered. No one moved. A thick silence spread across the room, and that was the moment everything began to shake. Celeste smirked, breaking the silence. Came to preach, Amara? Amara didn't turn. I came to show there's light beyond your family name. Colette stood up. This is a celebration, not a courtroom. Amara nodded slightly, then looked directly at the evidence. The lights cut out. In the darkness, a giant screen lit up. An interactive map glowed. Dots moving across the frozen north, community by community, lit up by Solar Heart. A child's voice played, I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. The room fell silent. No one looked at Amara as a guest now. They saw her as the epicenter. On screen, the light spread. Icy communities came alive, children reading, women wiring panels, elders wiping solar dust. No explanation needed. No speeches required. The guests froze. Celeste lowered her glass. Colette gripped an unopened folder. Someone whispered, This is legacy. Final caption appeared. 1.2 million lives, 3 continents, and counting. The ballroom lights turned back on, bright but no longer central. Amara turned away. No bow, no glance back. No one stopped her. She wasn't walking out of a world. She had left an old one behind, and carried forward a future they no longer controlled. Amara walked out of the grand hall, heels tapping lightly on the marble floor. No one called after her. No one dared. Behind her, the gala music faltered. Conversations faded, then stopped. Julian was waiting by a side path. He didn't need to ask. She didn't need to explain. They left through the service exit, along a snow-covered trail. In the ashen sky, there were no stars, but Amara's face glowed brighter than anything hanging above the chandeliers. A camera flash popped one last time, from a distant reporter who had followed quietly. No applause, no praise, only silence. The kind of silence that weighs the most, when truth is spoken, and no one can undo it. In the car, Amara unfastened her collar, leaned against the window. Her eyes were dry, her heartbeat steady. Julian drove, one hand on the wheel, the other passing her a water bottle. They didn't speak much, they didn't need to. Her phone buzzed, a message from Mai Lin, Southeast Asia coordinator. Cambodia confirmed. Solar Heart will begin installations in Kampong Tom province. Amara read it. No loud smile, just a quiet nod. Then a call from Kenya. Wanjiru, once a girl who received the first prototype flashlight, was on the line. Are you still carrying the light? Amara answered, voice low. Not just carrying, we're planting it. Outside the car, Montreal faded behind them. Ahead, distant lights weren't the destination, they were the starting points. The seaplane landed on the old lake. The northern sky still gray, but Amara's heart felt as light as falling snow. The small wooden cabin glowed with golden light. Inside, a group of young engineers were having dinner. An Inuit girl ran out and handed Amara a drawing, a rooftop, a sun, and her name written in shaky letters. Julian chuckled. We just rattled 100 years of history. Amara sat on the wooden step, removed her shoes, and breathed deeply. And we don't owe anyone an apology for it. In the kitchen, water boiled. On the porch, snow kept falling. She opened her laptop. The solar heart map glowed. A new red dot blinked in Cambodia. No fanfare, no spotlight, but every blinking light was the answer to an old question. What is success if it doesn't bring light to others? At the Moreau Grand Hall, the lights had returned, but no one went back to celebrating. Celeste stared at the now dark screen, wine glass in hand, tasteless. A guest adjusted his tie and whispered to his companion, "We just witnessed a pivot." Colette sat upright, lips pressed. The authority in her eyes had cracked. A PR advisor approached and murmured, "Press coverage has started. It's out of our control." She didn't respond, just looked up at the golden letters above the stage, 100 years of Moreau light. It was still there, beautiful, elegant, hollow. Below it, a void had opened. No one could fill it, because the real light had left the room. The next morning, Le Devoir's front page read, "The woman with no place in the family tree, yet lighting up an entire map." Below it, a photo of Amara, walking through snow, back straight, emerald suit sharp, the solar heart screen fading behind her. At a cafe near McGill, two students debated. One said, "She doesn't need a title, she has influence." On TikTok, the clip of the girl saying, "I'm not afraid of the dark anymore," was trending. Another stitch read, "When the light doesn't come from chandeliers, but from justice." At the Solar Heart Southern office, volunteers were replying to partnership requests from 12 countries. Amara posted nothing. She didn't need to. The voice had carried, and this time it didn't need to be led, only kept alive. At the Solar Heart facility in Nairobi, the line was still running. A young woman named Ayang, once trained through a free workshop, was guiding interns. These panels go to Myanmar. Next shipment leaves this afternoon. In the Philippines, a crew installed solar water filters. The Solar Heart logo on the boat, in a small but clear. In northern Laos, an old man touched a newly installed switch. Light flooded the room. He smiled. Meanwhile, in Montreal, the Moreau estate sat silent. The quartet had left. The chandelier still hung, but no one looked up. Amara was writing a letter by hand, the pen angled slightly. "We don't sell light, we bring it where it's needed." She signed, "The Solar Heart Team," then folded it, ready to send. A week after the gala, Amara Neong's name was no longer peripheral. The Global Impact magazine called her the woman who lit 3 continents. UN Women posted, "Legacy needs no lineage, just results." But at Solar Heart headquarters, Amara didn't hang those articles. She hung a photo, a little girl holding an old flashlight, standing in a snowy tent, smiling like spring bloomed in her hands. A staffer asked, "Don't you want recognition for yourself?" Amara shook her head. "I want the light to outrun my name." She turned it back to the screen. A new dot had blinked on. Balu, Bangladesh. No award ceremony, no speech, just one thing to do. Keep lighting. The next morning, snow had stopped. The northern sun peeked through, lighting the wooden wall where Amara had written a small phrase. "Leave light behind." No signature, no name, no frame, just black ink on raw wood, visible enough to read, quiet enough not to boast. Amara stepped outside. She checked the panels on the roof, adjusted the tilt toward the new sun. No media followed, no cameras, just hands, snow, and the sun. Julian stood by the lake, watching her from a distance. He knew she didn't need to be remembered. She only needed others to see the path. Because legacy isn't what bears your name. It's what carries the light. Late afternoon. The frozen lake mirrored a pale violet sky. Amar sat on the wooden railing, holding a cup of tea, gazing into the distance. Julian approached silently, placing a sketch beside her. A blueprint for a water filter powered by surplus solar energy. She nodded without looking, then slid a folder toward him. A plan to open a female technician training center in Nepal. No one spoke. No need. In that silence was understanding, a shared horizon, though each was drawing their own part of the map. On the table, an old flashlight still glowed faintly, casting gold across their faces. They didn't need to say anything. They were letting the light speak. In Myanmar, a woman named Sui connected wires at a village crossroad. No cameras, no interviews. She worked quickly, neatly, stepped back and hit the switch. The lights came on. Children cheered. An elder clapped. Sui didn't bow. Didn't step into the circle. She wiped her brow, removed her gloves, and stepped into the shadows. In Kenya, a team of young female engineers loaded containers bound for Mozambique. No white coats, no polished uniforms, just real hands, real cables, focused eyes. Each had once received a message from Amara. You don't need to take the stage, just take the tools. And they did, every day. No names, no spotlights, but no bulb glows without them. In Lagos, the old marketplace had been revived. Tin roofs overhead, each stall now lit by hanging lamps, bright enough to sort every thread of fabric. At the far end, a small abandoned stall still bore a faded wooden sign, Amara's Mother, honest cloth, honest price. No one sold there anymore, but every morning a neighbor girl came to wipe the dust. One day she found an old notebook beneath the counter. On the first page, in a child's handwriting, if there's no electricity, I'll draw the light. Signed in crooked letters, Amara, age 7. At a nearby solar heart station, a young engineer explained how to maintain the panels. When someone asked who founded the system, he just smiled. Someone who once drew light in the dark. In New York, at a global development summit, a reporter asked the Solar Heart representative, Is Amara Nyong attending? The rep smiled. No, she's somewhere that needs light more than this stage. All eyes turned to the LED screen behind them, showing a live feed from a remote mountain region in Peru. In frame, a woman with her hair tied back, holding a drill, securing the last solar panel on a bamboo roof. Behind her, a handwritten cardboard sign, Thank you for the light, from the one who didn't need to be here. Back in Montreal, Amara's wooden cabin had gone dark early. No more invitations, no more apologies, no more cameras, just a woman dimming her own light. So other places could shine brighter. At a village school in East Africa, a girl named Naima lingered after class. She wrote in her notebook, Light is opportunity. The teacher asked gently, Why did you write that? Naima pointed to the solar lamp above, because I used to only study during the day. On the classroom wall, a scribbled message read, Freedom begins when you can read your first word in the dark. Down the hall, a group of boys were disassembling a lamp for an inspection, following Solar Heart's technical manual. No one mentioned Amara's name, but the light was present in every notebook, and every word made clearer under its glow. And sometimes the most important lessons come when you're finally bright enough to read what you never thought you deserved to learn. At the Solar Heart headquarters in Kathmandu, visitors often asked, Is there a statue of Amara? The receptionist would just smile and shake her head. No, only working systems here. They passed a small garden, at the center a flat stone slab. No name, just an inscription, shine even if you're never remembered. Each morning staff touched the stone before work, not as ritual but as a quiet reminder. Do it for results, not for recognition. Inside, young engineers programmed solar distributions up by weather patterns. Most had never seen the founder's face. They only knew, wherever light is needed, someone must make it happen. And if you really want a monument, look to the villages, look to the lights still shining. In rural Bolivia, a cardboard box arrived at a newly opened health post. It didn't contain medicine. It held 12 solar-powered lamps, small, durable, portable. The head nurse opened the box and found a handwritten note. Don't keep light boxed for too long. It was born to go far. No signature, no brand. But everyone knew it was Solar Heart. That night, when this power suddenly cut out, the clinic kept operating. 3 hastily hung lamps lit the room just enough to save a newborn from its first darkness. No one knew who sent the box. But some gifts need no invoice, no thank you card. They just need to arrive at the right time, and shine in the right place. In the highlands of Nepal, a boy named Tenzin studied beneath a Solar Heart lamp nailed to a wooden wall. Before, he had to sit by a smoky stove every night. Blurred words, stinging eyes, faded dreams. But tonight the light was steady, and the dream was clear. His father entered, watching as Tenzin wrote on a large sheet, I will study medicine to bring this light into others' bodies. The father went silent, eyes reddening. 10 years ago, he had carried the first solar panel up that mountain, never knowing exactly what it would do. Now he understood. A lamp doesn't just light a room, it lights a decision, and some decisions will light up hundreds of lives to come. Outside, the sensor lights flicked on as a breeze swept across the stone walkway. Lena looked through the glass door, where the light fell on the trees, causing them to tremble, not from fear, but from the changing season. She turned around, standing in the room like a breath easing after a long spasm. Sometimes, Lena said softly, people don't need someone like themselves to walk alongside. They just need someone brave enough not to turn away when the truth is hard to hear. Richard placed his hand on the armrest. Do you think this family has enough courage? Lena didn't hesitate. I think someone in this house has started learning when to be silent and when to speak. Matthew held her hand, this time no longer with guilt, but with clarity, because for the first time his love had a voice and a place. In a village in southern Thailand, the community had just connected to the national power grid. On the day the lights officially turned on, villagers gathered in the courtyard clapping. A child asked her mother, "So we don't need the other lamp anymore?" The mother nodded and gently unhooked the solar heart lamp from the porch. She wrapped it in paper and placed it in a box. No tears, no farewell. Because they knew that light had done its job, arrived when needed, and stepped aside when no longer essential. No pedestal, no souvenir. True light doesn't demand worship. It only needs to be passed on, to where the dark still waits. At a small library in Wanda, a young librarian told a group of children, there was a woman not famous who brought light to millions. A boy asked, who was she? Is she in our history books? She smiled. No, but you're reading these books because of her. The children fell silent, looking up at the lamp above, its warm glow washing over old pages, every letter sharp and clear. No portrait of Amara, no medals, no commemorative day, just a quiet truth. Millions were learning, living, dreaming. Under light, she once sent. Yeah, some stories never make the syllabus, but they're the ones that make history worth rewriting. At a museum in Geneva, there was a section on innovation for humanity. Amid hundreds of exhibits, a small corner displayed a faded, scratched solar lamp. The plaque underneath had no inventor's name. It simply read, "No credit needed as long as the light arrives in time." An American tourist stood reading for a long time. He asked the guide, "Who made this?" The guide smiled gently. "Someone who didn't want to be remembered, only used when needed." Next door, students played a game called Find the Nameless Founder. The only clues, villages that once lit up, children who were once saved. No one ever won that game, because the name had become the light, and light belongs to no one. At the Solar Heart office in Dakar, a digital board showed the newest number of electrified communities, 2001. No applause, no ribbon cutting. Just an automatic email flashing across the screen. Lights are on in Mbuluke. Children have started studying. In the corner, a technician quietly touched the etched words on their desk. No signature needed, as long as your hands are turning lights on. That night in Mbuluke, a mother watched her daughter study under the new light. She whispered, "Don't forget to thank whoever did this, even if you never know who they were." The girl nodded and wrote her first notebook line. "Thank you for the light. No address written." But the legacy had reached her. In northern Cambodia, the dry season arrived early. Rivers shrank. The grid couldn't reach the highlands. One night, power failed during childbirth at a local clinic. No warning, no backup. Only the old solar heart lamp on the ceiling remained, flickering. The head nurse clasped her hands and whispered, "Oh, just 10 more minutes." The lamp trembled, then kept shining. The baby was born in just enough light. The next morning, the village elder wrote in the ledger, "Light doesn't promise to stay, but it always arrives when it's most needed." No one knew who had installed that lamp. No one kept it for memory's sake. They simply packed it carefully to send it elsewhere, where the next light still waits to be born. At the United Nations Sustainable Development Conference, a young delegate stepped up to the podium. No PowerPoint, no dazzling visuals. She read aloud a handwritten letter. "We don't need recognition. As long as every light turns on at the right time, that's our voice." The room fell utterly silent. At the very back, a woman stood. No badge, no name. She placed a small model on the table, a paper house with a tiny solar panel on the roof. She said nothing, then quietly left. On the hallway sign outside it read, "Don't look for the speaker, look for where the light is going." The speech ended with applause, but that voice says it was never on stage. It was in every light turned on after. In Chile, a tech startup conference was awarding global impact founders. The special prize went to Solar Heart, but no one showed up to receive it. Organizers were confused. A journalist asked, "Don't they care about recognition?" A quiet expert replied, "They're busy turning on lights somewhere else." At the Colombia border, a refugee station had just received a container filled with solar power equipment. On the lid was a small handwritten note. "If you're reading this in the dark, then we arrived at the right time." No sender address, no flashy logo, just a small light right where it was needed. Because those who light up the world don't stand in front of cameras. They stand where day and light is still missing. In a small house on the outskirts of Accra, Ghana, an elderly woman lay in bed, her breath slowing. Her daughter, a solar engineer, sat beside her, silent tears falling. The mother whispered, "You don't need to keep any of my belongings." The daughter held her hand, voice trembling. "Then what do I hold on to?" She smiled, eyes glowing faintly. "You keep the light I once sent out, and carry it forward." After the funeral, an old solar heart flashlight, the first gift, was placed on the porch. No shrine, no memorial. But that night, village children still studied under its beam. The mother left no land, no inheritance. Only this: a generation that knows how to light places the world had forgotten. High in the Ethiopian plateau, a new school was inaugurated. No grand sign, no donor plaque. Just a wooden board with a simple inscription: School of Light, for those who never had the chance. When asked why no benefactor was named, the principal answered, they wanted the light to spread, not stop at a name. Inside, every classroom was lit with solar lamps. Children sat upright, their handwriting round and clear under the soft glow. At the end of class, each student received a mini lamp to take home, so families could learn too. No one knew who Amara was, but everyone knew. Wherever this school appeared, darkness slowly disappeared. No need to remember the name, just remember the way toward the light. In a poor village in northern Vietnam, a girl named Ha Lin clutched a solar lamp tightly as she ran home from school. Her mother asked, "Where did you get that?" "The teacher said whoever studies hard gets to bring one home. I studied hard." That night, for the first time, Ha Lin did homework not by a smoky fire, but by clean light. She whispered to her younger brother, "This lamp isn't just for homework, it's for dreams." Outside, her parents sat silently, watching the glow spill from their kitchen like a quiet miracle. No one knew who had sent the lamp, but the most important thing had already happened. A child brought light, right where it belonged, home. In Kenya's western hills, a small truck climbed a slope, loaded with solar panels, wires, and hundreds of lamps. No logo on the door, no flashy brand. The driver, a middle-aged woman in a worn hat, remained silent the entire trip. At the local power station, she unloaded, signed the form in blocky handwriting, and drove off without a word. A staff member asked, "Which group are you from?" She replied, "I'm just the driver. The sender doesn't need to be known." The truck disappeared around the bend. But by evening, 3 villages were lit. No ribbon cutting, just someone who delivered light and didn't stop to take a picture. At a mobile health post in Laos's mountains, a nurse opened an unmarked delivery box. Inside were 6 solar lamps and a handwritten note. If you're saving lives, you shouldn't have to do it in the dark. No signature, no return address. That night, a woman went into sudden labor. A storm had knocked out the entire grid. Only the lamps from the box remained, hung hastily around the bed. The birth succeeded. The baby's first cry rang out in light and no one could trace. They kept the box, not to store equipment, but to remember someone out there always sends the light in time and never asks to be named. In a Haitian village, an old woman named Marie pulled out a battered solar heart lamp from under her bed. The shell was cracked, the button loose. She told her granddaughter, "Sim, just this one last time. I kept it for tonight." That night, the child spiked a fever. The entire village lost power. No one dared walk far in the forested dark. Marie turned on the lamp. Its faint glow was just enough to guide her. She carried her granddaughter to the clinic, the light swaying from her neck like a heartbeat. As the doctor took the child, the lamp flickered and died, for good. Marie didn't grieve. She nodded. It did its part. The next day, she wrapped the lamp's remains in banana leaves and buried it by the fence, not as a burial, but a seed, for the next light to grow somewhere. In a small apartment in Manila, an environmental engineering student sent a thank you email to Solar Heart. She wrote about her graduation project, low-energy study lights for flood-prone children. At the end, she said, "I don't know why I chose this path. Maybe because I studied under a lamp my father didn't know who gave us." The email received no reply. 3 days later, a box arrived at her door. No sender listed. Just a label that read, "We once lit your way. Now it's your turn." She cried, not because of the gift, but because she realized those who change the world don't often never know they did. And still, the world changes, quietly as light moving from room to room. At a private gathering in Nairobi, no live stream, no press, 20 people sat in a circle. Each had founded or sustained a group that brought light where darkness still lived. No one introduced themselves with titles. An elderly woman said simply, "I once sent lamps to the Amazon, that's all." A thin man with old glasses nodded. I installed those on medical trucks in Peru. No one praised. No one took photos. They sat in silence. Then all signed a shared pledge. We don't need to be remembered, only that the light keeps going. Before leaving, each received a lamp, not to keep, but to send, to wherever someone waits, still in the dark. At a refugee camp near the Afghanistan border. The lighting support list had one name left, so I saw to Amir, 7 years old. He lived with his grandmother in a tent made of canvas, surrounded by sand and wind. When a volunteer brought the last lamp, Amir asked softly, "Do I have to pay anything?" The volunteer shook his head. "You just have to do one thing. If you see someone else in the dark, remember to share." That night, the entire camp lost power. Only Amir's lamp remained lit. He walked from tent to tent, lighting the way for others. No one told him to. He just remembered the promise, and that tiny beam of light may have lit more faces than any before. The last child on the list became the one who lit the whole camp. In rural Bolivia, villagers gathered nightly at a small square to listen to the community radio. Each program began with a nameless tune, a soft melody like a breath. The elders would say, "When you hear this song, it means the lights are on." Few knew the transmitter was powered by solar energy, installed by young engineers once sponsored by Solar Heart. No logo, no honorary plaques, so just a melody rising each night reminding them light is still here. Not the light from bulbs, but the light of connection, of hearts beating together. The villagers named it the song without a composer, because sometimes those who bring light just want to play a note at the right moment quietly. On a remote Indonesian island, a full moon was hidden by clouds. The fishing village lost power. Inside a small hut, an elderly midwife helped a woman give birth. No lights, no machines, just a single solar lamp resting on a fish basket, its flickering yellow glow barely enough for the midwife to see her hands. When the baby cried out, someone else began to weep, but no one took a photo. No one filmed it. Only the child. And the first light it ever saw wasn't sunlight, but from a small lamp whose sender no one remembered. The most beautiful picture that night was of a life born without any lens to witness it. In a small town in central Vietnam, heavy rains cut electricity to the entire street. At house number 14, a family was about to hold a meeting for the first time to discuss sending Grandma to a nursing home. The father sighed, heavy-eyed. The mother said nothing, drying dishes. The daughter reached into a drawer and pulled out a solar lamp. Its glow, small but enough, lit their faces. They sat around a cold dinner table. No one brought up the nursing home again. Instead, old stories, quiet laughter, a few tears shedded with no one turning away. Sometimes light isn't for making decisions. It's just enough for people to see each other's hearts again, in a house that almost forgot what mattered most. In western Nepal, a village lay divided by a flood-season river. For most of the year, one side was unreachable, as if the world had ended where the water rose. One year, students set up a makeshift classroom across the river, in a place no one expected to need light, but someone thought otherwise. A box arrived on horseback. Inside were 6 solar lamps. No note. Since then, each night light shone from across the river. Villagers began calling it the Bridge of Light. Not a path to cross, but a signal that someone was still there, still living, still learning, and never forgotten. At the Grand Hall of the United Nations, the Global Social Impact Awards were being presented. The host stepped onto the stage, voice steady. "This year's winner is not here." The room murmured. He continued. "They sent no representative, no speech, only this note. I'm busy installing lights in the northern mountains." The screen played a video. A woman in a wool scarf on a cold rooftop holding a lamp, sweat on her brow but smiling. No stage, no bouquet, no applause, only light, reaching small homes one by one, and a final handwritten message. "I don't need to be honored, I just need to keep going." At a school in Rwanda, a young girl wrote an essay titled, "The Person Who Changed My Life." She described the first lamp she saw, the first night she studied without fear of the dark, the first time she read fairy tales to her brother under soft yellow light. At the bottom, the teacher wrote, "You wrote beautifully, but who was this person?" She shook her head. "I don't know their name." The essay was placed in a glass cabinet. Now every year, students write about someone they've never met, but from whom they once received light, and so, a name no one knows, becomes a living legacy each time a child turns on a lamp to study. At a field clinic in Sudan, a boy named Sammy lay still on a rusted bed. Fever lingered, his thin body fading. The machines had stopped. Night fell like a curtain over hope. A nurse found the oldest solar lamp left, turned it on. The dim glow was enough to see his face. Sammy whispered, "So bright, like noon at home." The nurse smiled, holding his hand. Sammy closed his eyes, without fear, not alone. In that final light he did not leave in darkness. Afterward the lamp was mounted on the wall. They called it Samegel, the farewell light, not to guide the living, but to ensure the ones leaving didn't go in silence. From South America to Africa, from the Himalayas to the Mekong Delta, there are people who quietly carry light across the world. No name tags, no news interviews. They appear where the light has just gone out, and leave when others can see again. No one calls their names. They don't wait for gratitude. They only ask one another, "Is it bright there yet?" If not, they move on. No map, no calendar, only one compass. Their hearts are still warm. And someone, a liaison somewhere, is still waiting. It's not a job, not a duty, it's a promise. No one will be left in the dark, as long as they can still walk. They call it a small light, but no light is small if it arrives on time. A mother lights it so her child can study. A father holds it as his wife gives birth safely. A child shares it with a stranger in a refugee tent. And those who send that light never ask to be remembered. Success isn't standing on a grand stage. It's knowing that what you built continues, even after you're gone. If you hold a spark, don't keep it. Pass it on. This world doesn't need more blazing suns. It just needs enough people willing to carry a spark. It can walk toward the dark. This story doesn't end. It begins where you stand.